Well, I'm here in Hong Kong, and this is where we're going to do our recording. The weather, the temperature is lovely. It's about 15-17 degrees Celsius, and for those of you who haven't been to Hong Kong for a long time, I think you should come to Hong Kong. It's a lovely place. You know, today the topic is about the dark side of Japan. Whenever you think of Japan, you always think of it as a paradise, right? Hokkaido, Tokyo, the tourist city of Kyoto, and you don't really hear the real Japan, the dark side of Japan, because the Western media doesn't give you that angle. So what I'm trying to share with you in this session is a few things, a few facts that I think most people are not aware of about Japan, about the dark side of Japan. Okay, the first one is about the auto industry, the global auto industry and the Japanese auto industry. You know that Japan at the moment is the largest automaker in the world, but they have the industry, the Japanese auto manufacturers have as a whole lost a very crucial opportunity to take leadership in the next 20, 30, 50 years, because the Japanese automakers and the Japanese government have lost the opportunity to take a commanding position in the electric vehicle segment. Many years ago, the Japanese car makers were the leaders, and at that time, Europe, UK and US laughed at the Japanese cars, that they were made of Milo tin cans and so on. Then the Japanese caught the British, the Europeans and the Americans sleeping, and they became leaders. The same thing is happening now to the global auto industry. The Japanese government, the Japanese automakers, the Japanese workers were sleeping at the wheel. They are caught in an innovator's dilemma, where given their past success, they think they cannot be defeated, they become complacent, they think they're champion all the time, not knowing that quietly, unnoticed by a lot of people, the Chinese government, the Chinese entrepreneurs, the Chinese engineers and the Chinese car makers were making massive inroads into electric vehicles. As of now, Japan, I think the whole Japanese car industry only contributes to about a few percentage points of global EV output, about 5%, less than 5% of EV output. At the same time, China now commands more than 25% of global electric vehicle output. That is a commanding lead, huge lead. And the worst thing is, the Japanese industry, auto industry and the Japanese government only recently woke up from their complacency when they saw that China's EV industry was advancing at such a rapid pace, not just within China, but outside China as well. Not just in terms of number of cars, EV cars being sold, but also in the deployment of new technologies, constantly deploying new technologies relating to EV whether it's battery, whether it's autonomous driving and so on. So they woke up and they found out that they are too late. And the government failed to recognize, because under the previous Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, he was promoting hydrogen cars, and they dismissed EV vehicles as something as backward, technologically backward. So they neglected it, because to produce an EV car you needed a lot fewer parts compared with the internal combustion engine. So they neglected it, they dismissed it, and then failed to support the development of the EV industry in Japan. South Korea has a much smaller population than Japan. But South Korea has got, in terms of public EV charging stations, South Korea has got 4 times more charging stations than Japan. So the Japanese government is totally way behind. And like I said, the engineers there, the auto manufacturing industry in Japan look at manufacturing EV cars as technologically backward, which of course we now know is totally wrong. And you know, when BYD started many years ago, everybody laughed at Mr. Wang, the co-founder of BYD. And guess what? BYD in 2022 sold 1.57 million EV cars, even more than Tesla. Forget about Toyota. Toyota produces like maybe 20,000-30,000 pure electric vehicles. So this is not really the dark side of Japan. Dark side as in criminal, morally wrong and so on, but it is to show a part of Japan that people don't talk about. And I will bring you to the next topic, which is corruption. I've said this before, that a lot of people think that Japan is such a clean country, free of corruption, that in the corruption perception index, Japan is ranked quite high. But dig for the truth behind those figures, because when you dig deeper, you find that Japan is easily one of the most corrupted countries in the world. Right? Now, if you watch the current corruption scandal that's hitting the Kishida administration, 4 ministers have resigned, 5 deputy ministers are affected, 1 special advisor to the Prime Minister, a few high-level LDP politicians, and as the investigation continues, you can expect a lot more politicians to be found guilty of corruption. This is a major scandal, corruption. But it's not only now. Over the years, in 1987, there's what is known as a Recruit scandal. Recruit is a human resource company, and at that time, the number of politicians affected in the corruption scandal was even more. You had the Prime Minister at that time, Takashita, the former Prime Minister Nakasone, the Chief Secretary to the Japanese government, and then members of almost every Japanese political party, LDP, Komeito, Democratic Party of Japan, all of them were found guilty of corruption. In addition to that, the Takashita cabinet, entire cabinet was forced to resign, and some of the members of his cabinet at that time who were forced to resign later became Prime Minister, later were reborn, although they were found, they were tainted with corruption in 1987's Recruit scandal. And not only that, the chairman of NTT, Japanese largest telecom company, Yomiuri Shimbun, one of Japan's largest newspaper, the Nikon Keizai Shimbun, all of them were also involved in the recruit scandal. This is 1987. Now, if you go back further to after World War II, right, the grandfather, the maternal grandfather of Shinzo Abe, by the name of Nobusuke Kishi. This was probably the worst of all, because he was responsible for forced labor, sexual slavery in China, and he was also responsible for the expansion of opium trade in China. And not only that, he was tried for war crimes. And the war crime, this is class A war crimes. That means the highest, the worst of all the war crimes. And no action was taken against him, because what happened was the US government intervened. The US government made a bargain with the LDP that they're going to promote this Kishi, Mr. Kishi, to be a Prime Minister of Japan on condition that he becomes pro-American, on condition that certain things have to be agreed upon. And CIA, the American spy agency, donated millions of dollars to LDP to manipulate the election so that Nobusuke Kishi can become Prime Minister. And the thing is, by 1960, under his administration, the Japanese government kept American bases in Japan. You know, after the Korean War ended, the Russians and the Chinese never had any military bases anywhere. But the US maintained military bases from the end of the Korean War up to now. And in 1960, the Security Treaty extension was agreed upon, where American bases were allowed to keep their bases in Japan. And what was covert is not just that CIA donated millions secretly, but also the Yakuza, the Japanese mafia. They used the Yakuza manpower to overcome massive resistance from the Japanese protesters. This is what Japan was like. It's not just that. If you look at the corporate scandal, recently you heard of Daihatsu, owned by Toyota, right? Millions of cars have to be called back because they actually did not conduct the test that they said they conducted. So even Perodua in Malaysia, Myvi were affected. But it's not just Daihatsu. It goes back a long way to Olympus, to Toshiba, to Nissan, to Kobe Steel, and Takada. Takada is famous for making airbags. But they found out the airbags were not fully tested, were not properly tested. They lied. So you find that across the Japanese corporate sector, across the Japanese political sector, corruption is the name of the game. Japan is, like I said again, I will repeat it, is one of the most corrupted countries in the world. So when you look at, when you go for your holidays in Japan and so on and so forth, think of the dark side as well. Right? I know many people are not aware of this because the Western media takes a lot of trouble to hide these kind of things. Of course, the Japanese media, not all, but many of the mainstream do the same thing. So what I'm saying is, if you link the corruption culture in Japan together with the inability of the Japanese auto industry and the Japanese government to leverage on the EV industry, there's a common factor. The ordinary Japanese people, they are either sick and tired, or because the LDP keeps on coming back as the ruling government, and the ordinary Japanese don't seem to throw them over except for once or twice. So there is this resistance to change, or the inability to change in a positive sense. That, I think, is the hidden side, the hidden weakness of Japan that people fail to talk about. Well, I'm not being anti anything, I'm just pointing out facts which, if you take the trouble, you can find for yourself, look for yourself. And a lot of media portrayal of Hong Kong is such that, well, you know, it's changed for the negative because of the many changes in the last couple of years. Come, I'm not paid a single cent by the Hong Kong Tourist Commission. It's just that I'm here and the weather is lovely, the place is lovely. Come for yourself. And if you have any comments, please share it. Please like our live session. And if you have any topics that you want to recommend or suggest, please send it to us and we will take it up. So with that, I thank you again. I thank you for listening to Capital Dynamics